Just then there was a great cackling and cheeping sound. It was coming from the barnyard. Maggie looked at Mr. McGarity. Mr. McGarity looked at Maggie, and Mr. McGarity said, "You may be wrong, Maggie. That sounds like trouble to me." They stood still and listened a few minutes. The cackling and cheeping grew louder. "Maybe an airplane is flying by," Maggie said. "Sometimes the hens make a great racket when a plane goes by." "I don't think that our hens are in trouble, Mr. McGarity. We have a very happy hens here." "Well," said Mr. McGarity, "I'd always hoped they were happy." "Well, they should be," said Maggie. "We're kind to them. We give them lots of good cornmeal, and we keep their nests nice and clean. If I were a hen, I'd be happy to live with the Mugginses." "I'm sure you would, Maggie," laughed Mr. McGarity. Then the cackling became louder than ever. It sounded as if the hens were afraid of something. Then a rooster crowed, long and loud. "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" Mr. McGarity's lip curled, and he nodded his head up and down. "We've trouble, all right, Maggie, and I think the trouble is Ricardo." Maggie looked at Mr. McGarity with questioning eyes. "Ricardo," she said. "I don't know anyone named Ricardo, Mr. McGarity." "Ricardo is the new rooster, Maggie. He came to the hen yard this morning. It sounds to me as if he were making trouble." "It sounds to me the same way," said Maggie Muggins, curling her lip and nodding her head. "I'm going over to see Mr. Troublemaker Ricardo. I'm not going to let him worry my friend, Mrs. Speck-Lewing." "Be careful now, Maggie," said Mr. Garrity. "He might take a peck at you." "I'll take a peck right back at him if he does," said Maggie Muggins. Mr. McGarity laughed. "I believe you would too, Maggie. But just the same, be careful. An angry rooster can be very mean." True be that. Maggie promised she'd be careful as she left the garden and went over to the barnyard. There was trouble, all right. Ricardo Rooster, who was new in the barnyard, was strutting about as if he owned the place. He had chased the chickens away from the water, though. He had pecked at Mrs. Speculewing, the old hen, who was Maggie's special friend. He had even chased the barn cat from her favorite place in the sun. The little dog who played with the chickens had long since gone up to the house to get out of Ricardo's way. The noise of the angry hens was now so loud, Maggie shouted, "Here, chuck, chuck, chuck!" They turned and saw Maggie, and they all stopped cackling and ran to meet her. Ricardo, his head held high, looked at her as if to say, "Who do you think you are?" Maggie looked back at him as much as to say, "Oh, I'll show you who I am, Mr. Rooster." Then she spoke to the hens. "Now, what's the trouble here?" They all began to cackle at once. "Wait, wait," Maggie cried. "One at a time. Mrs. Speck-Lewing, you tell me what the trouble is." "Well, Maggie," said the old hen, with the speckled wings, "Ricardo Rooster just came here this morning, and he thinks he's the cock of the walk. He's pecked at me, he's chased the chickens, and he won't let any of us near the water trough." Maggie looked at the rooster. "Well, Ricardo, what have you to say for yourself?" "Cock-a-doodle-doo, what is that to you?" questioned the rooster, his saucy head held high. "It's quite a lot to me," answered Maggie. "Mrs. Speck-Lewing happens to be a friend of mine. The chickens are my friends, too. So is the cat, and so is the dog. Cock-a-doodle-doo, what you say may be true, but me, I am Ricardo Rooster. I like to do things I'm used to. Cock-a-doodle-doo." Maggie shook her finger at the rooster and said, "Well, Mr. Ricardo Rooster, if you're used to acting the way that you've been acting today in our barnyard, you'll have to change your ways. I won't allow it here." The rooster laughed and said, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, I cock my tail at you. I'll act, my child, the way I please, and you can blow off on a breeze. Cock-a-doodle-doo." "Oh," said Maggie, "of all the saucy roosters, no one has ever talked to me like that before." Mrs. Speck-Lewing looked up at Maggie. "That's the way he is, Maggie, and we can't do a thing. He's bigger than any of us. We're afraid of him." "Well, I'm not afraid of him," said Maggie Muggins. "He cannot frighten me." Oh, this is so long. Jeez. The rooster laughed and stepped toward Maggie, saying, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, you had best skidoo, or I will peck your freckled nose, and I will peck your pretty clothes. Cock-a-doodle-doo." And he crowed his very loudest, and he spread his wings. Maggie backed away. Maggie was frightened now, too. "Get away from me," she cried. "Get away!" But Ricardo laughed all the more and just kept coming at Maggie. Mrs. Speckling crackled at Maggie, telling her to run, and Maggie ran. When Mr. McGarity saw her coming, he knew what had happened. Maggie didn't have to tell him. "Well, Maggie, I guess Ricardo got the best of you too," he said. "Yes, he did," said Maggie. "He came right at me, Mr. McGarity." "No." "Yes, he came right at me, and he said he'd peck my nose, and he said he'd peck my clothes, and you'd never guess what else he did," said Maggie. "No, what else did he do, Maggie?" asked Mr. McGarity. "He chased the chickens, and he pecked at Mrs. Speckling, and even the little dog ran up to the house. He won't let anybody near the water trough, and they're all afraid of him. He's so big, Mr. McGarity." "Yes, he is a big fellow, all right," said Mr. McGarity. "But just because he's big, Mr. McGarity, he has no right to be mean to smaller people, has he?" asked Maggie. "He has no right, Maggie, but that's often the way it is," said Mr. McGarity. "Well, it's not a nice way, and I'm going to show that Mr. Ricardo that it isn't. Mr. McGarity, where can I find a bigger bird than Ricardo?" asked Maggie Muggins with a very set face. Mr. McGarity raised his eyebrows. Maggie Muggins was planning to teach the rooster a lesson. "Well now, Maggie," he said, "it's pretty hard to find a bigger bird than Mr. Rooster, or one who makes a bigger noise. That rooster has a strong throat." "But there must be somebody, Mr. McGarity," said Maggie. "The only bird I know who could make a bigger noise and who could overpower that rooster is the Thunderbird," said Mr. McGarity. "The Thunderbird," said Maggie. "He's in the sky, isn't he?" "He is," said Mr. McGarity, "but he's sleeping these days. There hasn't been a bit of thunder in weeks." "There's going to be some today because I'm going to wake him up," said Maggie. Mr. McGarity laughed. "Now, Maggie, it's all very well for you to want to help the hens and chickens, but I'm afraid you can't do it by walking up the Thunderbird. When he sleeps, he really sleeps. Look up at the sky. Mr. Thunderbird is buried under that blanket of blue. Nothing is too much trouble for me when I want to help someone, Mr. McGarity. Ricardo might turn out to be a nice rooster if he found out how it feels to be frightened by somebody bigger than himself. Mr. McGarity, we've got to think up a way to wake that Thunderbird." And they began to think. They had to think quickly because they could still hear Ricardo crowing importantly in the barnyard. "Maggie," said Mr. McGarity, "I know the very thing. Blow up your yellow balloon. Write a note on it to the Thunderbird and then let it go. He may get it and he may not, but it's our only chance." "But a balloon doesn't make any noise, Mr. McGarity, except when it bursts. And if it bursts, he won't be able to read the note because the note would be in little pieces. A balloon might go up there, but it wouldn't wake him." "You're right," said the old man. "Well, I know, Maggie. Send it to the man in the moon. He sent a note to you the other day, and you went up and helped him. Well, ask him to wake the Thunderbird, the very thing," said Maggie, and she ran for her yellow balloon, and she wrote a note on it. "Dear Mr. Moon, will you please wake the Thunderbird? Tell him I want to scare a rooster, from your friend, Maggie Muggins." She went up the meadow and let loose the balloon. It went up and up and up and out of sight. Maggie waited, and then all of a sudden, the sky darkened. There was a low rumble. "Uh-oh," said Maggie, "he's waking up. He's waking up." The meadow darkened. It was covered by the dark shadow of the oncoming Thunderbird. He reached Maggie's side. He was 5 times bigger than Mr. McGarity. His wings were as big as the garage doors. His voice boomed like his name, Thunder. "Where's the rooster you want me to scare, Maggie?" he asked. "He's in the barnyard, Mr. Thunderbird. Now remember, I don't want you to hurt him," said Maggie, looking up at the great black bird. The Thunderbird laughed. "I won't hurt him, Maggie. Thunder doesn't hurt anybody. It's just a big noise," he laughed again. "That's what I am, a big noise." Maggie laughed too. "And that's what Ricardo is, but he pecks. He's been mean to everybody in the barnyard, Mr. Thunderbird. He'll change his ways when he sees me coming," said the Thunderbird. Maggie and the big bird left the meadow and went to the barnyard. When Ricardo saw them coming, his face turned green with fright. He looked around for some place to run, but the Thunderbird spread his wings and he blocked his way. At last Ricardo found his voice and crowed. Wait a second, what? There we go. Cock-a-doodle-doo, what I say is true. I'll be kind to chicken hen. I'll never peck at them again. Cock-a-doodle-doo. The Thunderbird looked at Maggie and winked. She looked at the Thunderbird and winked. And then she said, well, Mr. Thunderbird, you've heard Ricardo's promise. I think he is a rooster of his word, so you can go back to the sky. Thank you so much for coming down. The hens and chickens cackled their thanks too, and the Thunderbird spread his wings and went up, up, up into the sky. The barnyard brightened and the sun shone again, and Maggie went back to the garden to Mr. McGarity, who, truthfully, I believe Mr. McGarity is God. I do believe that, and all of this nature is spirit. This is a really beautiful book, Maggie Muggins. I just can't get over how beautiful the words are, really. I do get distracted at times, because that was just really special to read about the man in the moon. And saying that you just saw him the other day, which is true. I just did see Ken Swan the other day in spirit, and it says you went up and helped him, and it's true, I did. I delivered a message for him. Special book. Anyway, well, said the old gardener, I know the Thunderbird came down. It was so dark here in the garden for a while that I had to put my hoe down and wait for the sun to shine. Yes, laughed Maggie. He came. He was very kind and very nice. I told him not to hurt the rooster, and he laughed and said he was just a big noise and didn't hurt anybody. And then we went to the barnyard. Yes, and then, said Mr. McGarity. Then Ricardo's face got as green as grass. He was so frightened. He promised to be kind to all the hens and chickens from now on, and I believe him. Don't you, Mr. McGarity? Yes, yes, I do, said Mr. McGarity. He'll find out, too, that he'll have a better time that way. Yes, said Maggie, as she danced off singing, tra-la-la-la-la-la-lay. I helped the hens and chicks today. I don't know what I'll do tomorrow. Yay for Maggie Muggins. That was so sweet. Sweet, sweet children's book that my mother said her mother read to her when she was growing up. And when my mom gave it to me, she said that, well, she thinks I'm like Maggie Muggins a lot. The whole nature and spirit and all of that. And I do believe Mr. McGarity does represent God. That's how I feel anyway. And I do feel like nature in this book represents spirit. And I believe that Maggie represents the innocence of life, how we're supposed to be, how we're meant to be. Just a good girl who wants to do good and knows where she wants to be in life, which is in nature. So, beautiful, beautiful book. I love how it always ends with, you know, what she did today. I still don't know how that, I want to hear my mom sing what her version sounds like of singing the Maggie Muggins tunes, because I just made my own up, and it's like a hard tune for me to even sing. Thank you, puppies, for listening and letting me read to you Maggie Muggins.